This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. We speak from our personal experiences and opinions. The views expressed are solely those of the individual speaker and are not intended to malign any group, club, organization, or business. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. We speak from our personal experiences and opinions. The views expressed are solely those of the individual speaker and are not intended to malign any group, club, organization, or business.
Hey, folks, welcome back to Confronting the Line, where we are here to explore that very thin line between transformation and exploitation, between help and harm in the personal development industry. And I'm excited today. My guest, Rayann Gordon, I met through a mutual friend and who I've been having a lot of conversations with about the abuses in groups that are organized or come together around Buddhism or Buddhist faith groups. And I was so stunned myself to learn that there could be anything even nearing abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse, spiritual abuse, exploitation in a Buddhist community. Aren't those the good guys? So I've been wanting to talk with somebody about that for a long time. And Rayann reached out to me a little while back and we had a little chat. I was like, oh my gosh, you have to come on and we have to talk about this. So anyway, welcome, Rayann. How are you?
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I'm really happy to dive into this topic. And I also want to acknowledge right away what I feel when you talk about bringing forward abuse in Buddhism is how it's not that it's not there, it's not talked about very much because
Mm.
the practices of silence are very strong in Buddhism. So even now, as we go to talk about it, I feel like, and that's part of the training.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that. Okay, that makes sense. I mean, it's in so many things, like, we be silent, but it's more like I was silent about around the things that I saw, which, I say clearly I didn't experience the abuse I've since learned about from so many other people in the group that I was a part of, Landmark Worldwide. But you dismiss it, you explain it away, but then there's also this thing, so the staff, which is where most of the abuse happens in that group, the staff are like, "We can't tell anybody because if we tell anybody, then the good works will be ruined, and people won't like, they'll doubt their transformation." That's the product in Landmark, right? So, you silence yourself because you don't wanna hurt people. But it never occurred to me that whole other layer of if silence itself is part of the practice. Wow, I could get that. Well, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and the kind of we always like to kind of hear people's gut story. Folks, we're going to get into coercive control because Rayann is finalizing her master's degree in the psychology of coercive control. Coercive control.
It's hard to say, even for those of us in the program, it's even hard to say sometimes.
Yeah. So anyway, but why don't we just start with giving us a little bit of sense of kind of your story, as it were. What got you interested in all this? Which that always starts kind of with our story of usually joining something great, turns out to not be so great, and then we're trying to figure it out.
Yeah. I would say that I was a naturally spiritual child. And what I noticed is that in the rituals, I wasn't raised with a religion. And in the rituals we have Christmas, Valentine's Day, Halloween, I always felt this profound absence. Like, that's it? There's no meaning, kind of. Like, the meaning is presence. I always felt like there was something really missing. Yeah, it created this kind of loneliness and look for meaning and isolation. And when I was older, I started pursuing spirituality. So basically,
Mm.
right after high school. And I initially explored psychedelics, yoga, things like that, and became the apprentice to a channeler who was my next door neighbor, who was not trained by anyone. So she had some skill, some ability, but she didn't have any training or I would say any ethical code. I call her like kind of like a loose cannon kind of channeler. And what happened in that relationship was I realized that I was a naturally devotional person, being in situations where, there's growth happening, wisdom's being shared felt good to me. It felt organic and natural and right. And then I also realized eventually that she was guiding me completely off of my own life. She wasn't actually supporting my own intuitive development at all, which is ironic for an apprenticeship to a channeler. And the remedy to that I found when I realized that, which was after a few years, I'd had a breakup and it was like that first big love of my life. We'd traveled
Mm.
America together. The relationship was so powerful. And it was like, maybe this is a forever, is that first kind of considering that.
Right.
And when the whole time she was channeling, you and he will always be together. Meanwhile, the relationship's dissolving. It's clearly, coming to an end. And she kept giving me this message. And I was torn because my own intuition was, no, there's an end here. And when he moved on and I realized that I had been misled and lied to so badly for at least a year that was going on, something in me, I really was able to break with her. Like, how did this happen? And when she was confronted, she revealed that she believed that her channeling is infallible. She's not responsible for anything she says or any harm she causes. So she revealed her ethics, right? Every practitioner, every intuitive, I think, has their own kind of ethical code. And she revealed hers in that moment. And I thought the remedy was to sit quietly on a meditation cushion where no one would tell me what to do. No one would influence my mind. And I would just like come back to myself. And Buddhism seemed like a great opportunity that way. There was a teacher who a friend of mine had been studying with. She was really loving it. It was like Buddhism. Yeah, it was like we're allowed to dance sometimes on retreats. And so you get to move your body, and this sounded great. So that's the first part. I'll just pause here.
So, because I have two questions that's really interesting, and I think my first one was what had you realize that she was taking you off your path? But it sounds like that the second thing you said, which is when your own intuition was saying this relationship isn't right, and she was saying it was. Is that what I'm always curious about that moment?
Mm,
See, people think kind of like waking up to something being exploitive or even abusive is this like moment and then you change everything. It's not like that, folks. It's a very slow thing. Oftentimes we get involved in multiple kinds of relationships. Like maybe we're in a kind of high control one-to-one relationship and then we get involved with a group and or vice versa, we're involved with a group and then we go anyway, it's just not a sudden thing. But it was interesting the way you said that.
yeah. Do you want me to speak to that?
Yeah, just that. Yeah, that. And then my other one is about her rationale about being infallible.
Yeah, waking up to her, what happened for me was my suffering was just increasing and increasing. I was
Mm.
feeling terrible because there were these two realities, like clashing was like the conversations I would have with my boyfriend, ex-boyfriend. I think he was an ex already at that time, which was like, let this go. This is, we need to let this go. And then what she was telling me. So I was feeling just increasingly miserable in my life. And I remember I was I was doing many things she had guided me to do, including going to dance school. And I was like eating a salad and I was just crying into my salad. And I kind of asked, why are you crying? Why are you so sad? Why are you crying
Mm.
into your salad? And so it was like just this moment of reflection. And then the real break was, yeah, when he must have said something to me that was like, this relationship is really over. And I realized just because she says it's not doesn't mean it's not over.
Right. Like, so the reality was really conflicting with what she was saying. And
Yeah.
I'm just curious, what was her, you said that she had whatever and decided that she was infallible. I'm curious what her narrative or her reasoning, like, did she have a story about why her prophecies, her whatever, like were infallible, even though reality is like showing something different? You just can't
Found this
side effect.
very interesting. And as someone who works intuitively now and teaches people how to connect with their own guides, I still kind of can't believe that this happened. But I think it also shows a lack of training on her part and a lack of contemplation of what she was doing. When I did confront her about it, and so did my ex boyfriend, we both were like, that caused a lot of suffering and confusion. She said that when she's channeling, she slipped into channeling to answer this and
Yeah.
said that she's not there. She's not there at all. Only she is
Mm.
gone. Only her guides are there. So therefore she has no responsibility. And that, maybe we just didn't get it. It was never like I could be wrong. People have good days, bad days. You can be off track. Maybe you said the words in the wrong way so the person didn't understand them, or maybe you just saw it wrong. Right? Yeah, so she basically said in this art form of connecting with the unseen world, it alleviated her from all responsibility, and that is something cult leaders do as well.
I was gonna say that's not just like that's like a giant red flag. There's little red flags and then there's giant. And, I'm not sure if you've watched or seen any of the stuff about Twin Flames University. Anyway, that's coming to mind. Where he keeps getting in this pickle. He has too many women in the group, so then he starts getting these prophecies about who should be the woman and who should be the man. I mean, it's like nutsy. So rather than just saying like, "Oh, I got that wrong," or "Oh, whatever," they always either flip it back on the participant or the client or whatever, the follower. "Oh, you're just not getting it,"
Yeah.
or Kelly Ray, who I interviewed recently, her leader guy would always say, "Oh, you're just not doing the work." But it's always you over there. It's never me, leader, coach, trainer, teacher, advisor. It's always you. It's such a yeah. I mean, run.
It's
Just
so
run.
painful because when someone does confront a spiritual teacher, like I was her apprentice for 2 years, I basically learned what not to do in
There you
those
go.
2 years. When someone confronts us as someone who has kind of more power, role power in the situation than them, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
So when you bring something up to a spiritual teacher and then they shut it down, it's even worse because it's hard for people to bring stuff up to spiritual teachers in the first place. But that was a spell-breaking moment because I saw like, oh, she has no ethic. She has no flexibility. She can't take feedback. Okay. She can't teach.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah,
She
good
shouldn't
for
have
you.
been teaching. Yeah. But
Okay, so then you decide to this Buddhist practice is gonna did I get that right? Like, this Buddhist practice is gonna be the salve.
yep, it's gonna be the salve. And I went in there with one clear boundary, which was I do not want another spiritual teacher. I'm not shopping for a teacher. I'm not taking a teacher, which I think was a pretty good boundary. But I'm just gonna do the practices. I'm not gonna take this guy as my teacher. I just want to meditate and learn to meditate. What happened is I experienced some initial benefits from the practices for sure. I felt more
Right?
grounded. Huh?
I said, "Always?" That's another thing.
Yeah,
They're
for
like, "But the
sure.
work is so good," or the ideas. I'm like, "If there wasn't good stuff in there, none of us would ever get involved."
Yeah, yeah, it was wonderful. It was a good palate cleanser from the channeler, I will say that, because there was a chance to do ritual, which I loved. There was community, there was, like, this breathing and being with myself, and no one was telling me how to run my life, which was great. I stayed for 11 years. I went to the highest levels of the group. I became assistant to the leader for 4 years, during which time I saw and experienced spiritual abuse, like, pretty widely and in really incredibly slippery ways because that group did not have a teacher who was sleeping with students. So, when there's not sexual abuse or physical abuse, you really have to look at the dynamics. And they're so woven with the teachings that it can be really hard to see. Our community was like probably half the community was psychotherapists and they couldn't see it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So what could you give us an example when you say spiritual abuse? These terms are, like, getting used a lot now, I mean, compared to a few years ago, but so can you kinda give us an example of what that maybe looked like or
Yeah. So spiritual abuse is when there's coercion and control happening within a spiritual setting. And the reason it's so harmful is you're in that spiritual place in very vulnerable states. You're bringing like soul issues. You're maybe practicing in ways that make you very vulnerable and sensitive. It's like spiritual space is a sensitive space. It should be well protected.
Sacred space, right?
Totally.
That's what we go in expecting or assuming anyway, like that we're all on that page together at least, that this is a sacred kind of space. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we assume that the people holding those roles are going to take care of that, and care for that. And if they're doing a good job, I think they will. So, spiritual abuse can include things like humiliation, shaming, punishment. Let's see. Thinking of my situation in particular. Well, here's this interesting example. You want an example?
Yeah. I mean, it helps our audience kind of, because like you said, we don't see this.
Yeah.
I had a passage in my own book where I relay this story. There's this long used metaphor about Native American people did not see ships when, that's not actually accurate. It's not that they didn't see a ship. They didn't have ship like as a thing, and so they didn't know what it meant. They didn't know it's full of people who are coming from another land and who are, likely, what are they here for, right? But to me, this whole area is a lot like that. Like, we don't know what we're looking at. We're just learning even what narcissism, it's sort of narcissistic behavior, harmful narcissistic behavior looks like. I went through a whole period of actually learning what constituted abuse versus assault, that there is a thing called verbal abuse and verbal assault, not just physical. So yeah, any example I think helps our audience to learn how to see these things so we can go the other way.
Yeah. When I first heard the term spiritual abuse, which was in a letter that someone from my former community had written to the community, it was like I had never heard it. And I had been around spirituality for a long time in my adult life. I had no idea what they were talking about. And when I read the letter, it was like I was reading Japanese. And I don't speak Japanese. It couldn't go in my brain because there was no concept. And one line got through to my brain, which was that our teacher played chess with people, that he would manipulate people in this epic kind of chess game, triangulating, kicking people out, telling lies, all these things. And that line got into my brain. And I said, oh, yeah, that's true. But I don't understand the rest of what this person is saying. And I often go back and read that letter
Mm.
once a year because every year more of it makes sense. And I'm forever curious, as a spiritual abuse researcher, about why it doesn't make sense when you first hear it, right? What are those layers of conditioning and coercive control and what happens to your being that you can't take that in? So I have a lot of compassion for people who might hear about the things that we're talking about and think, I don't get it still.
Do you think spiritual abuse can happen in groups that aren't spiritual, like a workplace, or because these kind of like, when I've seen these dynamics in so many places, everything from a workout community. I mean, I had a big yoga. Now yoga's got that Eastern side of spirituality in it, but even Landmark, like it prided itself on it wasn't a religion. It wasn't about spirituality. We don't. Werner used to say that's the source of all their work. That's above my pay grade. This is just a seminar. But as you're describing, even what you're describing, I'm like, well, yeah, all that was there. And now that I do spiritual study, which is what I started as soon as I left, because I was like, oh, so missing that. But do you think spiritual abuse happens for people in environments that are not necessarily spiritual in the way we traditionally think of it?
I would call it coercive control or cultic abuse in those.
Oh, okay.
And with Landmark, I'm going to guess that even though it's branded as coaching, it is spiritual what people are
Yeah.
going through there. So then I would say it is spiritual abuse. And one facet of spiritual abuse is using texts or sacred scripture documents, sort of the tradition, to rationalize the abuse and to abuse people. And that
Right.
doesn't have to be like the Bible. That could also be like a workbook that someone wrote, that's seminal materials. So yeah, I think it's a gray area. I think Landmark could fall in there. Certainly Buddhism falls in there. And then if it's more of a workplace thing, then I would say coercive control. Yeah.
Well, in groups like in personal development or self help or and even professional development, but that are done in individuals, I always separate out done in groups. It's actually much healthier that way, like in a consulting environment. Not always. Abuse can happen there. They actually imply that abuse is an interpretation.
Yeah.
That's to me, like, that's the where this is confronting the line, that's the line. As soon as somebody's telling you that the victimization that you're experiencing is an interpretation, you're headed into the dark side, like, you're headed into it. So, a lot of these groups, the self-help groups, particularly of the human potential movement, which is sort of the bucket I put the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s self-help stuff, because it's all about self-empowerment and personal empowerment, and everything is an interpretation. So all I have to do to not experience abuse is don't interpret it as abuse. Forget about, actually confronting the facts that somebody is perpetrating illegal or harmful, like known harmful practices and behaviors. And that's on them over there. That's not even a conversation in these lexicons, because the whole thing is about all your power is in how you view it.
Yeah, that's a really common weaponization in Buddhism too. It's deeply weaponized in traditions where there's non-duality. On some level, we're experiencing non-duality, and sometimes in those practices, you're having non-dual experiences where you are one with the refrigerator, you are one with the plant, you are inseparable from the person sitting next to you on their meditation cushion. Yeah, when all the boundaries dissolve, concepts dissolve too. And abuse becomes a concept and it dissolves too. That gets weaponized when people use that to excuse the horrible things they're doing. And it's like,
Mm.
this is such a playbook move. I hate it. This is like the worst, one of the worst moves in spirituality is to take really expanded states or non dual states and to flip them, weaponize them so the leader can do whatever he wants to whoever he wants.
Mm.
Really common. So, my gosh, there's so many examples. Yeah. So, one example where it became really clear is there was this Buddhist teacher. This was not my Buddhist teacher, but Sogyal Rinpoche, who punched a nun at a retreat in front of about 1,000 people. So, a lot of witnesses to his abuse. It wasn't his first time being abusive. He was horrifically abusive for years and years. What happened to the group, though, is and her is it's like that ship. Like people didn't know how to interpret it because they had one, they had been meditating a ton, which makes it hard to think because you're literally practicing not thinking for hours and hours and hours. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that practice. I'm just saying that people should not abuse you while you're doing that practice.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. People didn't know how to interpret it. So people didn't yell out like, "Stop, what are you doing? Is she okay?" Because they were just in suspended animation, like, "What's happening?" And her own response after, some people said that's not okay, and he went back to teaching. Like, he taught the rest of a lecture, and people sat there through it. And then eventually he got asked to take a break. Her own response was, "People don't understand. That was compassion. That was compassion. That was a special moment between me and my teacher." And that's in that tradition. So there's a lot of stories in that tradition of crazy wisdom where a teacher acts in an unpredictable way to kind of wake up the student, to help them see something they couldn't see before. And then those kind of notions of crazy wisdom, I'm thinking of like a sweet example of crazy wisdom is like, if you were walking along and your friend or your child like taps you on the shoulder, "Look at that. Look, there's a deer," something like that. This is like a very sweet example. Like you get interrupted from whatever else you were doing, and then you see something you didn't see before. And in Buddhist stories, it's like it can be more abusive and it's like smacking someone into reality, right?
We called it ruthless compassion.
Yeah, the
That's
same.
a big, yeah. I facilitate a coaching cohort, and as we're looking to evolve, these ideas, these sort of transformational methodologies, and somebody asked me in the class the other day about ruthless compassion, and I said those two words don't even belong in a sentence. And then I did a little research and discovered wrathful compassion,
Yes.
which is more kind of what you're describing. And I still think it doesn't We don't need that. I'm a coach and trainer. You can interrupt people's patterns and thinking in ways that don't have cruelty, that don't have harm or pain. Okay, so let's pick up from where the computer went totally dark and black and cut us off, which was the this thing about ruthless compassion, wrathful compassion, spiritual beliefs, where something is justified, harmful, cruel, abusive behavior, which includes speaking, by the way. Sometimes people think, I know I did. Like if somebody wasn't hitting you or punching you in the face, that wasn't abuse. I was quite shocked to learn about that, calling people names and all this stuff, putting them down, diminishing them could be constituted as abuse. But that doing those things in the name of something good has been certainly a big permission structure inside of these kinds of groups. But I think in our society in general, we're just really ready to evolve beyond that because we can see enough to see it's not true. Even that insight, though, is tainted by that way of approaching it and often has a more limited effect, shall we say, than if you had that same insight without the pain piece.
I totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree. It's like this kind of tear down culture in these settings where, the leader's creating a group trauma and then they're feeding you this insight that came from it. What they're really doing is working on trauma-coerced attachment and making it so that you won't leave them. That's like what it's.
Ooh. Okay, tell us more about that because that sounds really important and interesting.
My experience, so in my group, I got very high up and very close in. And what I saw was that a lot of the behavior, and what I've learned in studying cults now in academia, is that a lot of the behavior is don't leave, and shocking people and also feeding on other people's disrupted nervous systems. So that sort of now we have a big explosion as a group, and now I'm the benevolent patriarch, and now you all kind of love me more because you're rattled.
Mm.
That's the trauma-coerced attachment, right? So it's inducing the trauma and then being the sort of hug after the trauma. And over a retreat in our Buddhist group, the leader would do this repeatedly throughout a retreat. So we talked earlier about how sensitive people can be in spiritual practice. And in other Buddhist groups, when I got out, I asked around and other Buddhist colleagues said, oh, silences seem to be very sensitive. Like a teacher would never interrupt silence for a participant unless it was a total emergency, because they know that you're in a sensitive space when you're meditating 10 hours a day. But for us, we'd be in silence, meditating 10, 13 hours a day and get called to the teacher's office to get berated. And something that would make no sense to participants a lot of times, right? He would just take issue with someone or something. And what I came to believe over time, my experience was that he needed to be fed. He just wanted energy in a way. And he was getting it by traumatizing people.
My coach calls it feeding the monster.
Yeah, totally.
Feed the monster. And it's taken me, I've been working with her for 5 years and I'm just now starting to see kind of in the day-to-day, like what that really means, that our upset. I just had a crazy transaction. I'm in the middle of a real estate transaction and the buyer's broker was like, just doing the craziest stuff. And I could recognize that there was some kind of disordered personality over there. But it took me 3 or 4 days, even with all the study I've been doing, to realize that my reaction and upset and was kind of feeding that monster, even if I wasn't feeding him directly, like I wasn't responding directly, but that I'm calling my 5 girlfriends to tell him, you wouldn't believe what this guy just did and da 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 da. But I was feeding the energy of that, which doesn't mean just shut up and take it, but to slow down and, one, interact with somebody who can hold the space and help me just come down. I'm an auditory processor, so I work a lot of things out in talking, but just bring my own energy sort of back into an equilibrium. And then, we responded. Thank goodness my real estate agent, she was hilarious at one point. She goes, I was married to a narcissist for 17 years and I've had so much therapy. I know exactly what to do. And she did. She did a great job.
Fantastic.
She was so awesome. She just did such a great job. She said, you just say the most simple version of what you need to say, period, and nothing else.
Yeah.
Like, just, that's it. No explanations, no anything. And if no is the response, no is a complete sentence. And just don't feed the monster. Anyway, I kept thinking that, feed the monster, feed the monster. So that's what it sounds like. I get it. I've seen it. Where these people will deliberately cause upset and then feed on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if anyone who's been in a group like this, who's witnessed this, knows what I mean. It can be hard to explain, but it's like they need attention, right? So, yeah, the other thing is like he would create it would be like Valentine's Day, or it would be some long weekend, like family Thanksgiving. Okay, yes, it was on Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving. An email goes out to all the senior students threatening that he's going to quit teaching if we don't do what he wants and be the way he wants. And I wondered, I was still in at that point, but I had this moment of thinking, is he jealous that we're all with our families and he needs us to be all freaking out so that he can feed off of that? Oh, that's weird for a spiritual teacher. So that was like one of those little spell-breaking moments.
My next question for you, and then we're going to come around to the coercive control stuff. So what kind of what broke the spell and had you leave?
Yeah, this is kind of a strange story. I got a concussion. And the concussion, when I got the concussion, I had a very profound spiritual experience. I believed I was dying. And it wasn't a legitimate near-death experience in that I didn't really leave my body. My body didn't die for a minute or something like that. But it was a spiritual death experience. And when I came back, something was really different. And right away, I went to meditate and it made no sense. Like, why all the intention that I would bring, and meditation was like the supreme, if you're not doing it, you're bad at that point. We had a lot of identity wrapped up in it, and it just didn't make sense. And whenever I tried to pull my attention in to meditate, I would get like a splitting headache. But what did make sense was like a broader experience of the world. Like, oh, there's birds outside. Why am I meditating? There's birds. And I started to see after the concussion, it's like I was terrified. I was trying to ground myself. But I also felt like something between the teacher and we were very enmeshed at that point. Something had kind of severed, like the concussion had disrupted something. And so as a good, highly dependent student who was cultivated to be that way, I told him about it. Like, he wasn't just this Buddhist teacher. He was a close mentor at that point to me, right? We were on the phone sometimes every day. We were in contact a lot. So I told him, hey, I had this really profound spiritual experience. And that's when the abuse cranked way up. So he worked his story different ways around it. But like, my brain was bruised. I was concussed. I was shaken. I'd had a spiritual experience. And he hit so hard with coercive control. It was like, this is your fault. The reason that this happened to you is a warning from these Buddhist spirits. And it's because you did something wrong. And if you don't clean up your act, it's going to be worse. In other words, they're going to kill you. This is the definition of spiritual abuse.
Well, it sounds like a binding technique as well. Like, I don't know if I would have heard that a couple of years ago, but like in saying that, it's like he sensed somehow that separation. It's like he's trying to bind you, because I can't imagine it.
Yeah, to him, for sure.
Right? Like,
for sure. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And there was a part of me that was so rattled by that, like, oh no, what if the relationship, what if I lose him and this tradition and everything I've put like 11 years of my life into, that was shaken. And there was another part of me that somehow had been freed. And it didn't come out all at once, like a maybe crazy person. I went on 28-day retreat with him within a few months of that happening to work for 28 days straight.
This is really common, folks, for those of you listening. What Rayann is describing right here is like when you have this moment. Kelly Ray, for those of you that listen to my episodes a couple episodes ago, she talks about the same thing, like confronting the leader. He kind of, works with her, whatever. And then she goes back for a year or two. Like this is really, really common. And that's why when you said that thing about like he's telling you you're going to lose and you're going to lose yourself and all this stuff, it's like I don't think we recognize that as something that is literally hooking a fish and reeling them in.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. And
and
they smell the weakness, right? It's like
Mhm.
sometimes it's not until someone gets injured or sick that they start working it harder. It's like the way that cult leaders will, invite people in who are grieving. Yeah, it's like they have a radar for that, I think. And what happened is that I ended up working this long retreat, and during that retreat, abuse allegations came out against him.
Oh,
And
no.
I got a front row seat, one, to being abused throughout the retreat, two, to seeing how they reacted to those allegations and just watching the shit show of it. And I still wasn't all the way out, but it's like something in me was really there.
That's why it's a gradual. I mean, I always say I got ejected, actually. I got sort of more or less kicked out.
Uh-huh.
My metaphor always is, and this happens a lot in groups like Landmark. They don't need you for anymore, for what your usefulness is expired for the moment anyway, and they eject you. And it's like being ejected from a spaceship. And your first phase is like, wait, I was in a spaceship?
What?
What? What do you mean? That was like the first year and a half for me, and then I start reading books, and this reporter gives me this book, Outrageous Betrayal. And I'm like, it took me 4 months to read this book because it's the actual history of Werner Erhard and the S training. And, on the inside, people go, oh, that was all Scientology hit job and it's all made up. No, it's incredibly well sourced. It's written by a journalist that actual has ethics and integrity. But that wasn't even it. It was that there wasn't anything being said in that book that I had even a hard time believing at all because I'd seen it.
Uh-huh.
Because
So you could take it
I
in.
had worked 10 years next to Werner and
Uh,
his staff and his team. So I was like, what? But it took me months to get through that book because it was so just shocking and upsetting. So that's like the whole first part, it's just, it's my point here is, folks, it's a slow rolling thing. And there's a reason why you see so many of us that were a part of these groups and saw these kinds of situations that spend years deconstructing it, one, to understand for ourselves, but also you feel compelled to warn people. You want to tell people what's happening. So anything else about your kind of like waking up and leaving?
Yeah, a lot of things happened on that last retreat that I ever
Mm.
did there. And one of them was that someone else made a joke to me. Very, like, we were like this most senior students. Someone else made a joke to me about our teacher being a narcissist. And I said, how is that possible? You don't think he's a narcissist, do you? And it was just that it was the injection of a different worldview coming in to the retreat center that I had never considered. So that was starting to happen. And because of the concussion, it's like my intuition was starting to come back. The concussion broke some part of that, the cult pseudo identity that Jilly
Mm.
Jenkinson talks about, which is all the conditioning and all the beliefs and the worldview of the cult and how it's so reinforced. And the concussion just changed how I saw things and how I thought. And I had a lot of migraines, so I didn't have as much energy to maintain maybe some of my old beliefs. And things were just popping through. So on that retreat, it's like someone would say something, like someone said to one of the leaders, it's just so easy to trust you. And I was like, no, it's not. Like, but I let myself feel it. And then, I was like, oh, wow, that's actually coming to the surface now.
Mm.
And then I distanced myself gradually. I left for Canada and basically laid on a rock for 3 months. I didn't read any books. I didn't read any spiritual abuse or cult recovery books. I didn't talk to anyone because I was paranoid that they would basically that I was deconstructing. I talked to one friend who was still in and I said, something's not right. And she said,
Mm.
I know what you mean. And we kind of left it there.
Right. Yeah. I had about 5 people that I could talk to, one of them being my husband, but yeah.
Yeah, right. I did talk to my husband, but yeah, I basically just laid on a rock for a few months, feeling and connection with my own ancestors, kind of teaching me what was going on. And then I gradually started talking to other people. Yeah.
Interesting.
And then I went back, as we do, after having been away. And I went back for a board meeting and I sat beside my former teacher for 8 hours. And I had been away long enough that I just saw it all.
Uh,
And then I was out.
So I'm going to jump a little bit in the timeline because there's something you had mentioned when we were offline that I really want us to talk a little bit about, which is this aspect of coercive control, the implicit versus explicit control. But let's start up with a basic on coercive control. So at some point, you got interested in that enough that you're getting a master's in the psychology of coercive control. Anything about what led up to that?
Yeah, because I work with people spiritually. I support them spiritually.
Mhm.
I'm trained as a death doula. I've done a lot of ritual training. So, I help people who are intuitive, empathic, usually type folks, sometimes with their spiritual lives and crossroads in their lives, grief, things that are happening. And I could not believe how many clients I was seeing who had experienced spiritual abuse and not necessarily been in a cult. Sometimes it was less clear cut, but I was seeing people from Kundalini yoga groups, Buddhism, Christianity, dream work groups, like all kinds of different settings, shamanic groups. Sometimes it was just like something happened there. I don't know what happened, but now my faith is basically destroyed. I can't access my own spirituality anymore. I feel like I've lost everything and I don't even know what happened or what that teacher did, but something happened between us. So this misuse of power or abuse of power. And so I became really interested in that. And that's why I joined the program. So that program looks at coercive control across settings like domestic violence, human trafficking, gangs, cults, and violent extremism. And the area that I focus on most in there is on spiritual abuse and how people reclaim the sacred. How do you get back
Mm.
your connection with the sacred? How do you change it if it needs to be changed into something healthy after it's been really tainted and, after it's been a source of trauma and suffering? If you want that. Not everyone wants that.
Right.
If you want.
Well, and so much of the time, I mean, what I've found in talking with so many people, both sort of like in the personal development cult world and out of the cult world, like that contrast is that kind of coercion. It happens so subtly. And, and I'll just speak from my experience in a seminar group, which is, they start everything with, we're going to present some ideas. Some of them are going to create some cognitive dissonance. They're going to be contrary to what you think, da, 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 da. We just invite you to just surrender to it fully, take it on fully for this weekend. And then on Monday, you can just reject it all. That's the invitation, right? So I just can tell, for those of you that are listening on the podcast, you had Rayann's face. Go to YouTube, follow Confronting the Line just to see the look on her face. So tell me what's wrong with that approach. Because I have people, even probably in the last week, somebody's told me no, but they tell you that you don't have to accept it, but to me, that's
you have to accept it till Monday. So my whole body is contracting and I am kind of near vomiting. And it's because they're making this quite explicit. So this is really interesting. I'll talk about implicit and explicit coercion. They're making it really explicit. I want you to suspend your boundaries, your critical thinking until Monday. Why? One might ask. If you're not doing anything wrong, why would you need me to suspend those until Monday? Yeah.
And we want you to take it on fully, try it on. It's like I'm in Nordstrom's dressing room or something. I'm going to try on these pair of pants and I'm going to see, does my butt look good in these? But that's a false equivalency. But that's how it sounds when they're saying it.
It sounds really reasonable and good, except for the fact that by asking you to suspend those systems, they're already taking you offline. And you shouldn't have to suspend them. You should be able to sort as you go. Because if you suspend them, you won't actually know if you need to leave. You won't know if there's something wrong. So they're basically, I can't believe they're so upfront about it, but they're saying, we're going to indoctrinate you for the weekend. Please let us. And on Monday, if you don't like it, you can throw it out. But by that point, you've already let us do our work.
Wow, that's so well said, Rayann. I just have to pause for a minute just to take that. Like, that's the most clear explanation of what's wrong with that. Because I've known for a while, like, something's wrong with that, but I don't know what exactly. And you just explained it so well. No, every seminar, every session starts with that.
I'm so sorry that's
And
happening.
not just in Landmark, in many groups, you know.
And what's implicit in there is that they're not saying out loud is, we know better than you. There's something probably wrong with you, and we probably know how to fix it. And so therefore, please give us the reins because you're not worthy of having them. That's I think that's what's not being said often.
Well, that was said in the introduction that got you to register.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't said that way. It said, tell us about some area of your life that's not working as well as you would like it to. And this is also a big thing in marketing, right? Like, I've had my own event business and now we're starting this, Illuminate platform. And I've lost track of the number of marketing professionals that have told me you have to identify the problem and say how you're the solution to the problem, which I would love to just throw that whole thing out. People can be responsible whether they have a problem or don't have a problem. I don't have to point out their problems. I don't have to foment their problems, which that's a whole thing we're seeing a lot of. Like, let me light the house on fire and then come save you.
Yeah.
So, that's the extreme version, but the everyday version is just like, let me point out the problems. So that happens in the introduction because the belief has been now for a good solid 20, 30 years, like very explicitly that if you're going to sell something in the commercialized space we live in, you have to be the solution to a problem. And I think that is also ready to be retired. Like, stop it. I don't have to be a solution to someone's, but people, if they have a problem or don't have a problem, that can be between them and their God. I don't have to get involved in that. I used to sell carpet. So I'm way going back to, that was my first job when I was 20. Somebody took me under their wing and said, I'm going to teach you sales because you'll be able to I was a single mom, you'll be able to take care of yourself and your kids. And that was true. I went to all these great sales classes and I'm realizing what ethical sales look like is what I learned 30, almost 40 years ago now. And that, which was, it was a carpet store. They came into the carpet store because they had a space that they need a carpet for.
Yeah.
I didn't have to create that, and I didn't have to promise them that their family will bond for life if they buy this carpet over that other carpet. I just had to find out, well, do you have dogs? Oh, we should definitely get you that extra Scotch Guard. But see, all of life can be like that. I go to a grocery store, not because I'm hungry, but because I'm a human and I know I need food, or I'm having guests over that night. I'm having a party. You don't have to create a problem in order to make a sale. So that's where it starts. Then you're in the program. They get you to suspend the whole thing. So that's really fascinating. And then why can't I then on Monday, though? So if we just stay in this metaphor, large group awareness trainings, which I'm assuming you're familiar with that term, right? So the thing about those, what's really central to that isn't large group and isn't training. It's peak experience. It's group peak experience, right? They spend Friday in the particular one I'm talking about, which is the forum, but it's replicated in insight, context, all kinds of groups. I know the pattern. I'm highly trained in it, but you spend the beginning getting people's buy-in. That's the first half of the first day. Then you spend the next day and a half to 2 days basically tearing down how they see things, how they perceive things, how they see themselves, how they see the world, and pointing out the fallacies into all of that. And then basically on Sunday, at some point, there's somebody in the group who's gone and done something totally outrageous, maybe called their parent they haven't talked to in 20 years or called to forgive the person who raped them, but it'll be something dramatic, really dramatic.
Mm.
And that person, that's always the first one. And they have a transformation, a breakthrough.
Right. It's like, see, it works. See, it works.
Right. And then the whole group, but you're like swept up in this. Well, you don't want to get left behind. So then we used to call it popcorn. People start popping, 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 popping.
Yeah.
And then even if you're like the first time I just kind of sat there quietly and didn't say anything, but I had this whole like, oh, I went into the program initially because my husband had announced he was going to leave me. And I was like, no. And my girlfriend said, no, if he leaves you, it's going to be a choice, not a decision. And if you do the forum, then it'll be a choice, not a decision. There's this whole exercise about choice which is another screwed up exercise anyway, on Friday. So by the time you get through Sunday or you get to Sunday night, you're like kind of high as a kite. Even if you haven't had your own insider breakthrough, the room, you're just like, oh my God, this is the most incredible stuff I've ever seen. That person just forgave the person who raped her, or that person just forgave the dad who abused them, or that person just recommitted to their wife or whatever. It doesn't, but usually there's got a big one. There's going to be something big in there. And then on Monday, it doesn't feel like you can just drop that.
Yeah.
That's where I'm going with this. It's like,
Yes.
talk to me about that.
Yeah. Humans are wired for peak experiences in a group. It is not a bad thing. It's a beautiful thing. It's too bad when it's abused and taken advantage of like this. A peak experience in a group could be like hunting together. Right? Like this is in our DNA. A peak experience in a group is like singing together, being at a funeral together, honoring our dead. That's a peak experience in a group. Being at a birth together. Those are peak experiences too. But cultural loss makes us look for them other places. And I totally empathize with what you're saying because in my Buddhist community too, it's like meditation can bring a lot of peak experiences. And, we would meditate and then we would do these big rituals together. And yeah, it would raise the energy. People would pop, people would have fights with the teacher. Things happen to make the group bond more. And yeah, you can't walk away from it after because then you're more in that community. So it's very like biological and very human. Like how fun are peak experiences to have in a group? How bonding are they? Like Minneapolis is having a peak experience as a group right now.
Right.
It makes people stronger. It makes them cohere. That is like a beautiful human thing. It is a terrible thing when cult leaders take advantage of that. And they do, of course.
Right.
And like you're saying, it's very systematized in your group and your former group, Landmark. Yeah. And in our group, it wasn't systematized, but it definitely played out for sure. Yeah, and then you can't go back because you've changed. In that happening, it has changed you as a group, and the only other people who get it are the people who were there. And I would love to see us having more peak experiences in groups that are healthy. I'm thinking I just looked at a wilderness school for my daughter, a nature school. And it's something that they offer the kids. Like when they are getting older, they're turning 10 or 12, they do these wilderness rites of passage. And the kids all stayed out in a yurt recently, and there were no grown-ups there. So it was like all these 10 or 12-year-olds together, and they're like, they have each other, but they don't have an adult. And of course they bonded, right? Like they bonded so much, they're going to remember that. And when I saw some of those kids after, they looked changed, they'd grown up. So yeah, finding healthy ways to have that. And then what you're naming about marketing, it's like the way that marketing overlays with spirituality, I think can be really horrific because it's like you approach spirituality because there's something wrong with you, you're broken, and we're going to fix it. Instead of spirituality is just part of being human. And it's just a human thing. And that's maybe why a lot of us want to do it. And so the spiritual industrial complex and its marketing is very focused on the pain point. And, that creates all kinds of ground for coercion.
So that's interesting. So the pain point itself, say more about that. Why does the pain point create ground for coercion?
Yeah.
It's because it makes me like needy or wanting, or like I'm going to definitely seek outside myself. Like one of the things I've been learning is how to seek inside myself instead of outside myself always. I think both are vital and important in our human existence and reality. But after 27 years in this group, it was always outside myself. Go to the group, go to the leader, go to the coach, go to a friend, you always went outside yourself. And so I've been practicing actually just not doing that. That's how far I am, is not doing that.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Not doing that, and then seeing, well, let me take a walk instead. I participate in a spiritual school called the Ridwan School, Diamond Approach. I've been doing that 13 years. I absolutely love it. And it is a very healthy group, which is a lot of how I've seen the unhealthy, because I'm like, oh, first I thought it was boring because I'm like, there's no high.
There's
There's
no
just
high.
happy. Like you leave and you're just like happy and relaxed. But I was so utterly exhausted that was kind of okay. But I still thought it wasn't, like nothing was happening.
Mm.
But it was a occasion, like what kept me in the first 5 years it was an occasion for my husband and I to talk, because we'd slow down busy life and do these retreats together, and we'd do a lot of the exercises and the things together. It really, I think it had a lot to do with keeping us together for the last 10 years. So it was like a practice. So that's what kept me in it through the first 5 years. And then about 5 years, I noticed some really subtle changes in myself and how I viewed myself. And one of them was my willingness to be in quiet and to see things around me. And I was like, I think this diamond approach stuff is doing something for me. And then, now I'm a big part of the community. I love the community but it's interesting because it is a really, really different experience. So what is that? Anyway, I lost track of my own question and my own reflections.
Well, I could talk about implicit and explicit coercion.
Yeah, exactly. You're saying that's explicit when somebody says, suspend your thinking.
Well, I would say that's an ask for control. So coercion is a threat. And here's a real explicit, if you keep dressing that way, I'm going to take the kids away from you. That's like an intimate partner violence kind of explicit coercion, right? And an explicit coercion example from my former tradition of Tibetan Buddhism is once you take higher level vows, you're like a snake in a bamboo tube. And the bamboo tube either goes up to enlightenment or it goes down to hell realms. And there's no lateral exits. There's not. So the coercion is, if you don't stay with this practice, with this group, your life is going to be terrible. It's going down. Now, this is from a tradition that, like you said, it's like all about compassion in theory and, non-duality and so on. And yet this bamboo tube metaphor that I still haven't been able to find the original sources for, I think the original sources are actually a different story, and then maybe it's been taken and turned into something else. But it's this explicit coercion that you have to stay. You can't leave. If you leave, it's going to be bad.
Oh, it's a big thing for a staff or a program leader
every group has that, right? Every group has that.
Yeah, whatever you're accountable for, like you're going to cost all those people. And it's always a cost to somebody else, which is because that's kind of, you're a do-gooder, right? Like, so the idea of it costing, you've already given up all yourself and boundaries. So there's like, you've already surrendered to sacrificing yourself to the nth degree. But oh my gosh, if you stop doing that, I had a friend of mine tell me the other day, when the typical thing was that when you left the seminar leader program there, you gave a year's notice. Well, they wanted 3 out of her, because she's an absolutely spectacular leader and very effective and, meant a lot to the organization. So that person leaving becomes a problem. And I've heard this again and again and again. In fact, the people bringing some of the stuff against Warner, like, that was a lot more personable. If you leave, then you're like betraying me, which we're seeing that on a large scale too. But you're going to actually cost the world So you're saying that's a kind of form of coercion, like it's a
For
threat.
sure. Yeah,
Okay.
and asking someone to give 3 years notice to leave an organization like that from a point of view from outside the organization, that's totally insane and, unreasonable. But when you're within it, you can be convinced, right, that some harm will happen if you don't do that.
Well, there's a bind. They put you in a double bind. So there's harm to others if you leave.
Yeah.
And then they're usually to yourself, like you're gonna no longer, like your life's gonna go to shit. I had somebody tell me that she was told when she left staff, they're like, oh, well, what are you gonna just go be a barista at Starbucks? Like then your life's not gonna matter at all.
Or it might be
So,
awesome.
right. She actually did end up going to work at a coffee shop because I didn't go to work at a Starbucks, but I did go to work at a coffee shop because I just needed just
Yeah.
something that was not life and death every day I walked through the door. So anyway, and so there's a threat to yourself or others, and then there's also, but that it also comes with this implied, you're so powerful, you make such a difference, you're so important to this organization, to this cause, that it's like, of course it would take us 3 years to just even get somebody who could do the basics of what you could do, like
Just like bullshit.
right. So
It
it's like
really
love
means
bombing combined with threats.
it really means don't leave.
Right.
Yeah, it's love bombing combined with threats. And then implicit coercion is like this. I think you're giving an example of it here, and it's much more slippery. So it's the things that aren't said out loud, but that still induce fear in the
Mm.
people who are there. So in my group, what was said out loud was, no one gets kicked out. We accept you. No one gets kicked out of this group. And then what happened, this is the implicit coercion, is you would see people, suddenly everything's seeming okay. They go in for a meeting in the teacher's office. Now they're gone and they're being escorted out of the retreat by the bodyguards. Okay, they just had to leave. That was what was best for them. And then they're never seen again.
It would be terrifying to your need to belong, right? So now you're going to start to fawn or bend however you got to bend to not be the one getting kicked out. Wow.
Yeah. And it would be like other people, suddenly they're demoted and suddenly they've lost their job and suddenly they're told they have to go back to the very beginning levels of the training because of something they said or did. And so the real message is, don't step out of line. You're going to be punished or kicked out.
Mm.
Even though there's no sign on the wall saying that. It's not as clear as the bamboo tube is, but it's in the space. And so we start to get really good, I think, as people who are in those situations at maneuvering around the coercion and the control and knowing what to say to protect yourself, to make it so that you can be safe for another day.
Okay, so let me ask you, I'm going to give you kind of an extreme example of this. So that's really great, implicit. So it's not said, it's not in a policy book, but it's probably alive in the practices and actions, right? And then sometimes those things do get articulated. I'll just say that from our environment. But so I'm watching this documentary right now, Trust Me or Trust Something, I don't know. Anyway, it's about the FLDS community. But it was really striking. It's quite different. It's on Netflix. It's very interesting. And I'm only 2 of the 4 or whatever, however many there is. But I was very struck by, so this is a community, this is the Warren Jeffs community. Warren Jeffs, gets taken to jail. He's been in jail, whatever it is, 8, 9 years now, for marrying and having sex with all these underage kids and all this stuff. And he's pretty much disappeared. He's disappeared into his jail life. But the whole the community that grew up around him, and he was second generation, right? So his father was the first prophet. This is a fundamentalist Mormon cult. So his father is the first prophet, then Warren Jeffs is the prophet. And so the people who are living here are third and fourth generation even, right? And people aren't joining this. But I found it fascinating. So he goes off to jail. He's been gone for 8, 9 years. And the whole community is frozen for years. But what was striking, so that was interesting as somebody who studies human behavior. I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. Because I've known a lot of people who just will quietly leave, but they kind of reassimilate back into life. And then they slowly start to let go of a lot of the, bad things that happened and whatever. But these people were just frozen in time. And then the world around them, what I found striking was really terrible to them.
Mm.
Like, you're choosing it. You chose that group. I hate this choice thing. I got all kinds of gripes with that. But anyway, because that's another so weaponized thing. You're choosing to wear those kinds of dresses. You're choosing to marry off all your children. So what happens in this community, though, is the outside world is really quite cruel. That's what struck me in the first one, is because their cruelty was justified in this idea that these people somehow were willfully and with full volition and knowing and understanding choosing.
Yeah.
They chose this leader. They chose that lifestyle. Like, it just seems like we have a false understanding of our own autonomy. That's really what I'm starting to explore. And it completely dismisses any element of coercion, implicit, explicit. Like, I mean, if something is your whole life and that's all you know, I mean, maybe it's too far to call that coercion, but you don't just change that. Anyway, I just was curious what your thoughts about that were. I was thinking about that when you were talking earlier.
Yeah, I feel really sad to hear that outside people were mean to them because it digs it further in.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't choose this, right?
Right.
They were manipulated into this, especially if it's a group where you even were born into it. Then you, of course, didn't choose it. But as an adult, it's like no one chooses to be abused. You're choosing a fantastic situation that's going to be great and fulfilling and wholesome and whatever it is, right? And it's that same logic of, if someone's being abused in intimate partner violence, oh, well, she chose to marry him.
She doesn't leave. How come she doesn't leave? She can leave at any time.
Yeah. And what's happening, and I've been that person too. I've been
too.
that person saying, I'm so mad that they won't leave. Why don't they just leave? I'm projecting my own resilience onto them when I'm doing it. They can't leave because they're between a rock and a hard place. And the rock and the hard place are coercion and control. And they can't leave until there's some situation, something that makes them strong enough. Like they're so worn down and they're keeping each other in, is my other guess. Is, if all of them were gone and it was just one of them alone, they might, and they had access to resources and support and some other worldview coming in, they might be able to leave. But when there's many people holding each other in the worldview, it's harder for one person to pop. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Well, that's what struck me. And I don't know the detail because they only touch on it in like a minute and a half. And there are people, I mean, this documentary exists because there are people, the person making the documentary who actually sees this and is trying to help these people, help this community. But I was just really struck. Like they start evicting them from their houses and, under whatever, because they're applying the logic and the rules of a reality that these guys have lived outside of for, a few generations, actually. So that clash, and I just think we're so sloppy as a communal society. It's this stuff we don't understand. We don't understand coercion and control the way you're talking about it. And we really do think, well, somebody can just put on a different outfit, cut their hair, and walk away. And it just isn't like that in almost any discipline. Like, gosh, even trying to get me to change the brand of paper towel I like takes something, do you know?
Yeah,
Let alone, but then we just start stripping people, like we don't provide help or care, but in the most basic of ways, until somebody comes along who does, which is the person who's making this documentary, right? So that's really interesting that the coercion and control is the rock and the hard place. Okay, I'm going to be taking that apart for a while. That's like really good.
Yeah, and people who haven't been through massive identity loss often are not giving the best advice. So it's like with coercive control or spiritual abuse or cults, it's like, oh, well, once you've lived it, you can spot it, you have empathy, all these things. But if you don't know what it's like to lose everything you believed in and what that feels like, then it's maybe back off the Mormons because it's pretty intense. It's pretty intense.
Right. And too, like when you're talking to somebody who's fully in, like mentally in, physically in other words, in the mindset, in the ideology, in the belief system, they can't hear you. They don't see the world the way you see the world. And who's to say what you're in is better than what they're in? mean, my whole rule is anybody being hurt. So that's kind of that's the obvious line, right? And that's what busted me up. First, they ejected me, kind of, and then, I had some people come to me for help because they were being hurt, and that was like a red line for me. Once I knew explicitly that there was hurt, but then I thought it was isolated. I was like, that hurt's just happening over there between that small group. Then to find out that those harms were a feature of the whole system, that abusive person's personality became a culture and then a teaching, which has now gone out past that group. Like the ruthless compassion is a great example. That's a teaching that's like way out past the group itself, past the original teacher. And not everybody who uses it harmfully. But I would assert most do. They just don't know they're doing harm because they're in and out. I'm a coach. I'm a consultant. I've got you for 3 days. I've got you for 3 months. It's a short time and then I'm out. I'm not in your reality anymore.
Yeah. And there's something I think you're pointing at, which is that people don't see the whole pattern when they're in. Because, and this happens a lot in Buddhism with how silence is weaponized because people don't talk to each other. So people who are being hurt don't talk to each other. They don't talk to themselves. So they're not writing down what happened. They're not even, I wouldn't even let myself think the thought that maybe this isn't good. Maybe there's something going on here. Maybe he shouldn't have done that. Things like that. So it's like you're not able to be honest with yourself because the coercion and control has worked on you to that degree. You're not telling other people. So there's all these siloed cases of abuse that happen where if any of us saw them all at once, often it could be spell breaking. Not for everyone, but
Hello, that's exactly what's, oh my God, you're describing my world completely.
Yeah, you put it together and you got the spell breaking. It's like, I was trying to put it together, right? And it was like, but the information is kind of controlled and not always explicitly controlled. It's like we were never told not to talk to ex-members, but most people just don't do it. So
well, I think there's
it's not encouraged,
Don't you think there's some part of us that knows? Like, it kind of cracks me up. So the title on my book, the main title is this a cult? ? Right? Because that was the question I was asking myself. And in guest rooms, almost 50 articles, people asking that. It was okay for outsiders to ask that question. But when I, as an insider, asked that question, total sacrilege. Like there's people who won't even interact with me or talk to me who were good friends because they don't want to ask that question, let alone know the answer. Like, it's taken me years to find even my own answer. But the question is so threatening to our identity, especially if our identity has been subsumed by the group and it's now the group's identity, right? Like you can't question anything. A good friend, a consulting partner of mine, we say, what changes the world isn't answers, it's good questions,
Yeah.
That breaks the spells. But questions are hard to ask, like for a lot of people.
Yeah, and you can only take so much, I think, in your nervous system when you're deconstructing and when that's happening. I have a similar experience. Certainly, there's definitely people who I don't think want to talk to me or ask the questions I'm asking. And because I'm a cult researcher now, I might even be kind of threatening to some people because I see it a certain way and they don't want to see it that way.
And I think we have to let that be okay too.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, you've got to let that be okay. Like the best advice I got at the beginning is only talk to people who come to you because the ones coming to you are ready to ask questions.
Yeah, and sometimes I'm amazed with spiritual abuse at how long it can take. So, sometimes someone will come to me and be like, I've been out for 8 or 9 years, but I'm just starting to piece it together. Or like, I haven't ever talked to a therapist about this, but I've been out for 6 years. So not everyone rushes to deconstruct or rushes to get help.
Most don't actually. It's 7 to 10 years in general is the
I kind of rushed to deconstruction pretty quick. I think because I was so close in, it was like, this feels so bad. I want my power back. And somehow he got it. So that was very motivating for me.
Well, Rayann, we're so glad that you did because what you're learning and your way of sort of articulating and explaining some of these pretty complicated concepts really is really fantastic. So thank you very much. I think this is a good place to sort of pause for today. I have a suspicion we'll be talking again because I just started my Patreon channel Beyond the Line, and what's over there I really want to start looking at is like the lessons we've learned, like really getting into some of this. This is more academic space, right? This is more like, wait, what's happening? So anyway, I just really appreciate what you're bringing to the conversation. And I know there's so much more. There's a whole bunch about intuition that I'm going to have you back. We're going to talk about and how that plays a role in here, because we just so often don't realize that we've lost ourselves until something happens, like you were saying. And then you're like, whoa, wait a minute. And then we got to build that resilience back. So thank you. Any sort of final words and wrap up of today's session? And then I want to hear, where you want people to find you and anything you want us to know about you, and which will also, folks, always put in all the show notes. So you don't have to remember it. Just go into the show notes and the links will be there. But so yeah, any final words and wrap up, and then what do you want folks
Great.
to
Well,
know
I
about
just
you?
want to thank you for doing this because I know it comes at a cost and risk. And, of course, not everyone will appreciate what you're doing. But for people who have been through something like this, it's incredible. And for people who are listening, who are sorting something out, who are deconstructing from Buddhism or another tradition, I just want to say you're not alone. It's hard, and there's so much beautiful life ahead of you. One thing I will say is I went to a former meditation teacher of mine, someone who was very kind, actually, who was within the tradition, but who was a kind teacher. And I asked him when I realized what was going on, what's going on with our main teacher? Like, why is he so mean? And he told me very plainly what was going on. And I said, does he have brain cancer? Like, what could it be causing these behaviors? And the kind teacher said to me, Rayann, I see a bright blue sky ahead of you. You don't need them. There's a bright blue sky ahead of you. And that is what I see for any person who's recovering from coercive control, is that it is hard and there's so much creative potential there on the other side of it, because you can really reshape your life. So just want to acknowledge that for anyone going through it. My website is rayanngordon.com, and you can find me on Substack at rayanngordon.substack.com, where I write a monthly newsletter where I sometimes blend ritual and abuse recovery, because ritual is a way of recovering our meaning making, recovering how we understand things.
Yeah, I want to do actually, I'd love to do a Beyond the Line episode just about ritual and the role of ritual, because it's something I didn't appreciate and have come to appreciate, and it's really important. So, well, thank you. I love the blue sky. I'll second that. It's not always an easy journey, but it's well worth it. So,
My pleasure,
thank you
Anne.
so much. I appreciate it, and we'll speak again.
Let's talk soon. Bye.